Governor Romney's central economic plan calls for a $5 trillion tax cut. On top of the extension of the Bush tax cuts, that's another $1 trillion, and $2 trillion in additional military spending that the military hasn't asked for.
I don't have a tax cut of the scale that you're talking about. My view is that we ought to provide tax relief to people in the middle class, but I'm not going to reduce the share of taxes paid by high-income people.
Well, for 18 months, he's been running on this tax plan, and now, 5 weeks before the election, he's saying that his big, bold idea is never mind. And the fact is that if you are lowering the rates the way you described, Governor, then it is not possible to come up with enough deductions and loopholes that only affect high-income individuals to avoid either raising the deficit or burdening the middle class.
I will not reduce the share paid by high-income individuals. I know that you and your running mate keep saying that, and I know it's a popular thing to say with a lot of people, but it's just not the case. Look, I got 5 boys. I'm used to people saying something that's not always true, but just keep on repeating it and ultimately hoping I'll believe it. But that is not the case, all right? I will not reduce the taxes paid by high-income Americans.
If you believe that we can cut taxes by $5 trillion and add $2 trillion in additional spending that the military is not asking for, then Governor Romney's plan may work for you. But I think math, common sense, and our history shows us that's not a recipe for job growth.
Let me repeat what I said.
Sure.
I'm not in favor of a $5 trillion tax cut. That's not my plan. My plan is not to put in place any tax cut that will add to the deficit. That's point one. So you may keep referring to it as a $5 trillion tax cut, but that's not my plan. Okay. Take it, go to Congress, fight for it.
That's what we've done. Made some adjustments to it, and we're putting it forward before Congress right now. A $4 trillion plan.
But you've been president 4 years. You've been president 4 years.
Right.
You said you cut the deficit in half. It's now 4 years later. We still have $1 trillion deficits. The CBO says we'll have $1 trillion deficit each of the next 4 years. If you're reelected, we'll get to a $1 trillion debt.
Now, Governor Romney has ruled out revenue. He's ruled out revenue.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
look, the revenue I get is by more people working, getting higher pay, paying more taxes. That's how we get growth and how we balance the budget.
Right.
But the idea of taxing people more, putting more people out of work, you'll never get there. You never balance the budget by raising taxes. Spain spends 42% of their total economy on government.
Okay.
We're now spending 42% of our economy on government. I don't want to go down the path to Spain. I want to go down the path of growth that puts Americans to work with more money coming in because they're working.
On energy, Governor Romney and I, we both agree that we've got to boost American energy production. And oil and natural gas production are higher than they've been in years.
Energy is critical, and the president pointed out correctly that production of oil and gas in the U.S. is up, but not due to his policies, in spite of his policies. Mr. President, all of the increase in natural gas and oil has happened on private land, not on government land. Right now, the CBO says up to 20 million people will lose their insurance as Obamacare goes into effect next year. And likewise, a study by McKinsey & Company of American businesses said 30% of them are anticipating dropping people from coverage. So for those reasons, for the tax, for Medicare, for this board, and for people losing their insurance, this is why the American people don't want Medicare, don't want Obamacare. It's why Republicans said, do not do this. And the Republicans had the plan. They put a plan out. They put out a plan, a bipartisan plan. It was swept aside. I think something this big, this important, has to be done on a bipartisan basis.
I think without a doubt, you saw that participating in so many Republican primary debates helped Mitt Romney. He was right from the beginning, more comfortable debating. The president was rusty.
And he could barely look at Mitt Romney, which was also interesting. He wouldn't really engage with him, whereas Mitt Romney would sort of take him on every issue.
It looked like Romney wanted to be there and President Obama didn't want to be there. He seemed like he was happy to be there debating. President Obama gave you the impression that the whole thing was kind of a lot of trouble. I don't, and this...
Governor, when it comes to our foreign policy, you seem to want to import the foreign policies of the 1980s, just like the social policies of the 1950s and the economic policies of the 1920s. Every time you've offered an opinion, you've been wrong.
Attacking me is not an agenda. Attacking me is not talking about how we're going to deal with the challenges that exist in the Middle East and take advantage of the opportunity there and stem the tide of this violence.
Here's one thing I've learned as Commander-in-Chief. You've got to be clear, both to our allies and our enemies. Now, you just gave a speech a few weeks ago in which you said we should still have troops in Iraq. That is not a recipe for making sure that we are taking advantage of the opportunities and meeting the challenges of the Middle East. Both at home and abroad, he has proposed wrong and reckless policies. Now, he's praised George Bush as a good economic steward and Dick Cheney as somebody who shows great wisdom and judgment. And taking us back to those kinds of strategies that got us into this mess are not the way that we are going to maintain leadership in the 21st century.
Governor Romney, wrong and reckless policies?
I've got a policy for the future and an agenda for the future. And when it comes to our economy here at home, I know what it takes to create 12 million new jobs and rising take-home pay. And I will not cut our military budget by $1 trillion, which is the combination of the budget cuts that the president has, as well as the sequestration cuts. That, in my view, is making our future less certain and less secure.
Bob, I just need to comment on this. I think Governor Romney maybe hasn't spent enough time looking at how our military works. You mentioned the Navy, for example, and that we have fewer ships than we did in 1916. Well, Governor, we also have fewer horses and bayonets because the nature of our military's changed.
You went to the Middle East and you flew to Egypt and to Saudi Arabia and to Turkey and Iraq. And by the way, you skipped Israel, our closest friend in the region. But you went to the other nations. You said that on occasion, America had dictated to other nations. Mr. President, America has not dictated to other nations. We have freed other nations from dictators.
Let me respond. If we're going to talk about trips that we've taken, when I was a candidate for office, first trip I took was to visit our troops. And when I went to Israel as a candidate, I didn't take donors. I didn't attend fundraisers. I went to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum there, to remind myself the nature of evil and why our bond with Israel will be unbreakable. So that's how I've used my travels when I travel to Israel and when I travel to the region. And the central question at this point is going to be who's going to be credible to all parties involved. And they can look at my track record, whether it's Iran sanctions, whether it's dealing with counterterrorism, whether it's supporting democracy, whether it's supporting women's rights, whether it's supporting religious minorities, and they can say that the President of the United States and the United States of America has stood on the right side of history.
Well, I don't think this debate's going to change a thing about the trajectory of this race. The first debate said it all, and this debate won't stop it.
But I think this was just, the whole night was a case of a president who's a strong, decisive commander-in-chief who knows what he believes, says what he believes, is consistent in his beliefs, and Governor Romney who is wrong and reckless and all over the place.
And tonight we saw a very aggressive Obama who used the same strategy as in the second debate, attack. It didn't help him in the second debate. I think he won tonight on points, Barack Obama, no doubt. But the political win tonight, Romney's momentum, if he has it in Ohio, is undimmed tonight.